All right, so we're recording live now. Okay, so first of all, I heard Dan speak on the Sports Science podcast going back a couple of months ago about it was your performance blueprint or your performance profile. And first of all, it spoke to me because in terms of my own coaching process, my own coaching philosophy, a lot of it would be based around like the self-determination theory of motivation, having the player as the central driver and having a strong coach athlete relationship and putting the player in the center of the process through autonomy and competence and relatedness and so forth. So this spoke really, really loudly to me because I saw it as a kind of a nod in the hat to my own coaching process. So I'm really looking forward to the next hour that you're going to put out here, Dan, or however long it takes. And I have loads of personal questions that I want to throw out you anyway, all right? So thank you so much for taking the time out to present to us. And I'm truly grateful and I'm really excited for what you have to share.
My pleasure. No, and thanks for tuning in, guys. As Adrian said, he got in touch with me a couple of weeks, and can honestly say I'm always kind of looking for new experiences to work in new sports, and this is a new area for me. You'll kind of see my kind of branding through Instagram and stuff is the fight side, because I've got an interest in combat sports, actually, predominantly things like kind of jiu-jitsu, MMA, etc. But as I say, I think a lot of your ideas will hopefully be applicable, and I think the chat function is going to be open, guys. So please do feel free to throw out any questions throughout, like Adrian said, and also I'm kind of going to ask you to kind of be active participants in this as well, rather than just hearing me kind of chatter on at you for an hour. So I've got a little bit of a PowerPoint share, so hopefully you can see it here. I'll just load that up for you guys. Is that all right, guys? Can you see that, Adrian? Is that?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, brilliant, cool. So we're going to talk a bit about performance profiling, guys. What I'm going to do to start us off first, I'll do my little kind of just spiel first. The question that we all sports psychologists like to ask when kind of first doing one of these sessions. It's just a case of just out of curiosity, really, what sports psychology means to you. So I'm not sure if anyone of you guys listening has kind of any thoughts on that at all, whether you've worked with a sports psychologist before or whether you've. Well, I've realised, sorry, I'm not sure if I can see the chat function while I've got this. And oh, can I at the top? If I can't, apologies. Adrian, I'm not sure if you can see any of the responses. You can just tell me if anyone's written anything.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I can't see the chat function myself there at the moment.
Okay, no worries. Well, I'll tell you what. What we might do in a minute, then we'll just we'll make you the voice for the crowd in a sec, Adrian. We'll just let you talk. But Adrian, just from your own experience, what do you kind of perceive sports psychology to be? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, like I suppose personally, my experience as a sports psychology would have been that, you know, an awful lot of coaches or clubs or teams will wait until there's a problem before they bring a sports psychologist in, and it's more of a reactionary thing as opposed to a process that they're deeply invested in. Personally, I think everyone is a psychologist. I think that, you know, from the players you play with to the shopkeeper to, you know, your local greengrocer, everyone has the ability to lift you up or pull you down. So yeah, sports psychology to me is it's an evolving process. It is interlinked with who you are as a person to who you are as a player in terms of your athletic identity and your value system and so forth. And it's something I value very highly.
Yeah, no, that's a great response, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. I think one good thing about sports psychology as a science, just like you probably find kind of, Adrian, maybe from your own practice, kind of just like S&C, I think in the kind of last 10 to 15 years has really exploded, and people are embracing it more. It's becoming more the case with sports psychology as well. And I think it's because we're starting to see it more as a process of kind of optimizing performance rather than maybe what we traditionally think of a psychologist, something or somebody we go to speak to when things are necessarily going wrong. So by definition, kind of sports psychology is this process of using psychological strategies and techniques to optimize both our performance and well-being. So that's where we've got to think of it. I mean, put that in a nutshell, a simple sentence, this idea of really optimizing the mindset for our best performance in sport. So something like to start with as well. We're probably familiar, I'm not sure if you've heard this term, sport is 90% mental. Like I say, I'm not sure if about the chat function, I'm not sure what people's view is, but it's interesting to see. Again, Adrian, I'm going to use you as the voice and kind of when you see this particular slogan or this saying, what are your thoughts on that? I won't be offended, by the way, things a lot less, because we're going to kind of talk about it a bit more in a sec. But when you talk this idea of sport is 90% mental.
Yeah, I don't know about percentages, but I think it's I think whether you believe you think you can win or you believe you don't think you can win, you're probably right. So your thought process drives everything, you know. So I would have it as one of the upper levels of performance, because even from an S&C standpoint, you know, I was once asked, you know, what's the best program for hypertrophy, and the best program is the program you can get someone to complete, you know. So, and it's just as simple as that. And the psychology around handing someone a program, you know, you could hand someone who's very much stuck in the past, and you could give them a program of back squats on it, and straight away they're going to think, oh my God, the last time I done back squats, I was sore for a week after, you know. And someone who's very future orientated in terms of their mindset, you know, you hand them a program with back squats in it, and they'll think, you know, this is going to improve my vertical jump, it's going to improve my ability to field high ball, and they're looking at it with a completely different outlook, and that's going to directly affect the intent in which they hit the program with.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and it's an interesting perspective. So we see this quite a lot, and I actually see, not going to kind of against what sports psychologists kind of maybe try and build their trade on a lot of the time, but this particular quote actually came apparently from Dick Folsbury, the Folsbury flop guy, the high jumper. And it actually kind of in context, he said that sport is 90% mental at the very elite level. So when it gets to those kind of fine margins, research actually shows that kind of between 50 to 90% of variance in performance is actually down to psychological factors. So making those kind of small percentages count as well. So kind of we've all got an idea. When I throw this question out to the crowd, people kind of usually will say anywhere between kind of 50% upwards is psychological. It's correct. So, I mean, even at the lower levels when we're not elite, there's so many mental and psychological factors we need to input into our performance as well, too, which can make a huge difference. So, building on that idea, again, Adrian, I'll throw this question out to you in the group. Do you know how many kind of hours a week your athletes will train a week?
Yeah, anywhere between generally 8 to 10 hours a week.
8 to 10 hours a week, okay. And do you know how many hours of that they use towards, say, specific psychological kind of specific training or psychological preparation?
Very little, I'd say.
Yeah, very little. So this isn't a criticism of anyone. This is just the kind of disparity we see in performance. And when we think of a numbers game, this is really, when we start to think about it a bit more, the numbers don't really add up. So we say that sports psychology, let's say for a majority, if we're being kind of reserved about it, they say around about 50% of their performance is psychological, but the development of the psychological side, the mental S&C you could call it, actually accounts for very little. And don't get me wrong, obviously, for some athletes, they're naturally going to have certain attributes, certain psychological traits. Obviously, for things, say, let's use confidence as an example. We know a great way to develop confidence as an athlete is just to train those physical skills so we feel more competent in them. But when we actually, like I say, think about psychology in that way, there's actually a big disparity between the importance we place in psychology and the amount of time we actually kind of spend developing psychological skills. And that brings me to this next point, this idea of kind of what I refer to as the kind of 1% mentality. So for anyone really, sometimes, and there are athletes out there understandably maybe don't have as much understanding of sports psychology or haven't used it before, who are maybe a bit reticent to kind of drive forward psychology. I say kind of, even if you consider it to make a 1% difference, it's a worthwhile investment. When you think of the amount of, like I say, I'm going to use a combat sport example here because that's what I'm interested in. But you see the amount of, for example, fights in MMA where the judge's decision comes down to a single point. In jiu-jitsu, I know I've been in tournaments where I've lost by a single advantage, a single point, a single takedown. So even if you're really able to utilize sports psychology to make that 1% difference, that can actually be a huge positive influence in regard to your performance. So just something to keep in mind. That's my sports psychology spiel over, guys, trying to kind of sell the idea to you. So we'll look more now at the actual main process today, which is the performance profile. So what I might do actually, for a sec, if I stop sharing the screen for a second, I'm just wondering if we might be able to, I can see the chat function again. So guys, if you can hear me now, I'll go back to the screen in a minute, but just before I take to the next slide, I'm just wondering what you guys consider to be most important skills or the attributes which make a great athlete in your sport. Just any words that come to mind, kind of any terms. I'm not going to steer you towards any kind of particular areas, just attributes that you feel make a great athlete. Okay, good. So we've got things like attitude, composure, and pressure situations. Any advance on that, guys, before we go? Okay, so if I go back to where we were. Yep, so like I say, it's a range of attributes really. So when people come up with this thing, another interesting thing as well, when I ask this question, regardless of the sport, I'm not sure if it's because I'm a sports psychologist and people are kind of just responding the way I think, but kind of instinctively when people talk about the attributes which make a great athlete in their respective sport, they tend to focus more on the psychological attributes, which is where this really idea of a performance profile comes in. So performance profile, I'm about turning this into a history lesson. It actually relates to this theory called personal construct theory by a psychologist called George Kelly, and essentially said that basically we all have our own personal way of viewing the world. Like Adrian said at the beginning, in terms of regard of your kind of coaching philosophy, making the athlete at the center of the process. If we're going to do that, we have to understand how the athlete understands the world around them and what they feel is most important to them. So based on that kind of theory, two psychologists called Lou Hardy and Richard Butler came up with this idea of a performance profile, which is essentially a tool which enables athletes to kind of really look at the key physical, sport-specific and psychological attributes which are going to underpin their success in their sport. And the interesting thing about this particular way, it's not a kind of one-size-fits-all approach where you're given a thing and going list these attributes. It's up to you to determine from your own experience and what you want to achieve, what the most important skills are for you to develop and grow in your sport. So that's essentially the background behind where it comes in. So why do we want to use it? So it's got a number of benefits, really. Been shown to be, a lot of people actually refer to it as a motivational tool. So it's great for enhancing motivation because it shows us where we are now and gives us an idea of where we need to be. Great for increasing confidence as we grow and develop these attributes. A really good way just to effectively monitor our growth and progression in sport in relation to kind of specific skills. And most importantly for me is this idea of enhancing self-awareness, really. So this is going to sound a bit strange and a bit of a bold claim, but I genuinely believe as a sports psychologist, or in general, the most important skill you can impart on an athlete is self-awareness. I'm not sure if that goes to Adrian as well from an idea of S&C, but it's this idea of actually getting an athlete to understand and fully embrace what they need to do. So I won't throw this question out to the floor necessarily now, but I know from experience, if I had to ask athletes I work with, right, list me now your 5 top strengths, or list to me now what your kind of core values are, or give me a list now of your key areas for development. Now, instinctively, a lot of them need a fair bit of time to think about this and grow and develop those ideas. But really, obviously, if we're wanting to kind of enhance ourselves as an athlete, these are questions we really need to know because we need to know them so they give us a clear direction, a kind of compass which points us in the direction of where we want to be going. So about that idea of self-awareness or knowing what we want to be working on, we can't really create goals or really give ourselves the best opportunity to grow and develop in our sport. Hopefully that kind of idea makes sense to you guys. So what we're going to do now, without me chatting on too much now, we're going to kind of get started on this idea of creating what's known as a performance profile. So like I said, it's a tool which enables us to assess the key attributes for our success and the key areas for kind of priority of development. So if you have a pen or paper available with you, ideally, guys, what I want you to do now, and again, I'll stop the screen for a minute and we can kind of share this in the chat function. I want you to get a page and just split it into 3 sections, or just do this in your mind if you want to, or on a Word document. So the first section is physical skills. So these are just physical capabilities that all good athletes possess, okay, regardless of sport. Regardless of what sport you are, what are the kind of physical attributes you think makes a good athlete? Secondly, we have sport-specific skills. So this might be more of a technical, tactical side and things which are specific to your sport. Some sports such as specific to Gaelic football or hurling. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't know the sports, I'm sure, as well as you guys. There's these ideas of skills are important. So it might be certain passing attributes, shooting attributes, positioning, things like that. And then finally, we have the psychological skills. So this is all about those kind of mental capabilities you want, which you feel are reflective of kind of the mindset of a top athlete. So what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to think about this. As I said, I'll stop sharing the screen for a minute, and please feel free again just to kind of write any ideas you get down in the chat function as well. Like I said, it's really important that this process is personal to you, but always doing a bit of kind of information sharing and sharing your ideas is really useful as well. So as I say, I'll stop for a minute so you guys can see the chat function, and then any ideas you've got. So it's for physical skills, the sport-specific skills, and the psychological skills. And ideally, we want to be able to create quite a rich list of all three of those, because we're going to kind of try and narrow it down in a minute. So just take a bit of time to see. To just stimulate a bit of thinking, I'll put in the chat function some of the classics which people kind of often write up or often kind of articulate as important to them. Just give you guys another minute or so to think about it. In fact, what I'm going to do quickly, so I forgot what the next slide is, which is a bit strange. So I'm just going to share the screen again quickly. So another way of doing this, so I'm going to show you a question now. So it's a bit of a strange one, I appreciate, but sometimes it's a good way to stimulate a bit of thinking. So this is something which we often kind of throw out as sports psychologists called a miracle question. Okay, so like I said, it sounds a bit odd, but bear with me. So this miracle question goes like this. So it says, imagine you went to sleep tonight and that overnight a miracle occurred. When you wake up, you find you have become the athlete you've always wanted to be. The only issue is that since the miracle happened overnight, nobody is telling you that the miracle happened. So when you wake up in the next morning, how are you going to start discovering that a miracle happened? Hopefully you're with me on this, guys, okay? So a miracle happens overnight. What do you notice in terms of the way you feel, the way you act and carry yourself in the sport, the way you interact with others, and the way you perform, okay? So like I said, a bit of an odd left field way of thinking about things, but this idea of a miracle question is sometimes a good way to help kind of stimulate thinking. If you were to be, or wake up tomorrow being the athlete you always wanted to be, how would you notice that things have changed? How are you performing differently? How are you behaving? How are you thinking, kind of thing? So that's an alternative way to give us an idea maybe of some of the things we want to look at. So again, I'll stop sharing for a minute and you can maybe think about that. If there are any questions as well so far, guys, please just feel free to drop them in the chat and stuff. I appreciate if I'm going through things at a rate of knots and some things aren't making sense or just kind of flat out sound a bit strange or odd, just feel free to message us. Okay, cool. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to think now of a list together. Like I said, I'll send these slides over to Adrian afterwards as well, because I appreciate this is really a process which, although you can do quickly, it is good to kind of reflect on and take some time on to get the most of it. But once you've kind of got your attributes, then we'll have our kind of physical, our sport specific, and our psychological, something like this, okay? And then now what I want you to try and do, hopefully if you've got a bit of a list together, I want you to kind of try and choose between, ideally somewhere between 10 to 12 of the attributes you believe personally, so it's not what other people think, it's not what your coaches think, that you believe are most important to your growth success as an athlete. So at this stage, what you really ideally want to do, you want to get a nice mix of them really. Even if you're more focused on the physical, you're more focused on the sport specific, it's good to get a good mix. Hence why I say 12 sometimes, so kind of I say 4 of each is the ideal. So maybe 4 physical, 4 sport specific and 4 psychological. So your physical might be power, speed, strength, agility, might be sport specific, passing, shooting, defending, attacking, etc. And then your psychological might be confidence, focus, mental toughness, etc. as well. So I'll just give you a minute now just to think about, if you have written any down, what are the most important attributes. If you struggle to get between 10 and 12, that's absolutely fine. Just shorten the list maybe even just 8, even if it's a couple for each. You just want an idea really of any attributes you think are really important. Another important thing to remember at this juncture as well, guys, why I remember, this isn't a process as well of highlighting what you're bad at or what you're good at, okay? It's all about what's most important to you. Some people make the mistake, they think, oh, I have to choose the 12 areas I really need to work on, I'm weak on. Not at all. These might be areas you're already really good at. So the key word here is importance. Importance and the attributes which are going to help you reach your full potential as an athlete. So just thinking about that for a second. Okay, so as you're putting your list together, the next thing we want to do is come up with a definition, essentially, for each attribute, okay? Now, this is really important as well, like I keep saying, harking on about, this process has to be personal to you. So it's really important that how you define this is personal to you as well. So, for example, if I had to ask 10 athletes what resilience means to them, you might get 10 different responses, and that's absolutely fine because it's got to be what it means personally to you. So one athlete might define resilience as the ability to kind of persevere when the going gets tough. Another one might define resilience as the ability to bounce back from adversity, okay? Now, in addition to defining what that attribute means to you, this is kind of a newer idea in performance profiling. I want you then to think about what the opposite of that attribute is, okay? So, for example, on one side of the continuum, if we had confidence, the other side might be self-doubt. And I want you to kind of try and define that as well. So on the next slide, I'll show you an example. So I might go, right, confidence is an important ability to me. I define a confidence athlete as someone who has a strong belief in their ability to perform well and win. Then you might say an athlete who has high levels of self-doubt, they have a lack of belief in their ability to perform well in training and competition. Okay. So like I say, what we're ideally doing, if you imagine kind of a piece of paper in 2 sides, on the one hand, we have the low end, that's self-doubt, and then on the other hand, we have confidence, okay? So we're kind of imagining a bit of a kind of continuum from one side to another. Again, I'll just give you a minute or 2 to think about that in terms of the attributes you're talking about or discussing. With a chat function, I appreciate it's a bit difficult. So if anyone has any questions so far as well, feel free to just quickly unmute and throw them towards me if you want, guys.
So Dan, would there be a carryover from some of the things we have written down in terms of physical skills, technical skills, psychological skills into your chosen attributes?
Absolutely, Adrian. Yeah. So you want a nice mix of these, ideally. Like I said, so you're going to have a couple of physical, a couple of sport specific, and a couple of psychological. I appreciate as well, like I said, this is by no means a kind of perfect process. So I appreciate kind of coming up with a polar opposite of some of the terms and attributes might be quite tough. There's kind of sometimes an alternate way of asking, say if you said strength, so you'd say an athlete who is strong is this. So, you know, they're powerful, able to dominate or an opponent, have good levels of physical strength. Or you might say an athlete who isn't strong is this. So
yeah, perfect.
Lack strength to beat an opponent, if you see what I mean. So we're just trying to kind of develop kind of a bit of a as I say, guys, I appreciate this kind of process might take a while to think about, so we won't spend too long on it now. I'll just give you some ideas. The main thing really is, even if you're struggling to think of the kind of polar opposites at the moment, so the confidence, self-doubt, main thing is at this stage, I just say try and make sure you've got a nice selection of attributes in place, okay? And then the next phase is nice and simple after this one, guys. We're just going to rate on a scale of 1 to 10. So 10 is optimal importance, 1 is minimal importance, how important we feel each attribute is to our growth and success in our sport. Okay, so by all means, you might rate them all as 10. A lot of athletes do, or they're optimally important. You might rate some lower. It's not a case of having to rate them in descending order, if you see what I mean. So from 10, 9, 8, 7. They might all be 10s. They might be somewhere in between, okay? Just try and give yourself an idea of a 1 to 10 rating of the importance of these attributes. Not to put you on the spot, Adrian, but I'm not sure if you're kind of just making notes or writing this process as you're going along. If you are kind of having a go, do you mind sharing a bit of what you've got so far?
Yep. So yeah, so with the physical skills, I had strength, power, agility, endurance, and movement capacity. Cool. So technical skills, I just had catching, fielding, using both feet, using both hands. And on the psychological skills, I just said performing the technical skills under pressure.
Okay, nice, performing under pressure, yeah.
So,
okay, brilliant.
Yeah, my chosen attributes, I pulled in a lot of them from the boxes. So again, strength came in, endurance came in, a movement capacity came in, and I just listed them down along. I didn't kind of get through them all in terms of giving the opposites. So okay. Yeah, like I was, like a lot of them are self-explanatory anyway, like,
yeah.
Strength, weak, blah, blah. I didn't kind of get into written definitions, and I'm just on my 1 to 10 scale here now at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so that's it. And like I say, guys, this is also like, this isn't a perfect process, certainly not first time around. I always say it's a process of kind of continual refinement and going back to it as you go along as well. And the idea of kind of these opposite constructs, that's just really to give you a sense of scale, which I'll explain more in a minute, because the next phase of the process now is all about giving yourself a rating for each of these, okay? So obviously, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to, but what might be an idea now as well, if you want to share on the chat function the next bit, it could be a nice idea to get other people's perspectives. And what I mean by this, as I keep saying this, so whilst this process is all about you, what can happen sometimes is we can tend to be, or what we find from experience, some athletes are overly harsh on themselves. You get a couple who are guilty of going the other way and kind of perceiving themselves to be superior in areas. But really sometimes by doing a bit of kind of triangulation, or what we kind of refer to as 360 feedback. So for example, getting a coach or a teammate to share their input as well, we get a more balanced view. So with that in mind, for example, if I go to the next one, we give ourselves, the next phase is for each attribute, we give ourselves a self-now score. So it's a bit random because we use a 1 to 7 scale for this, okay? So this has just been shown in research to be the kind of most, or the best number really. So a 1 to 7 scale rather than a 1 to 10, which we might traditionally use. So 1 basically equals very poor and 7 is the best I can be. So if we imagine our continuum kind of self-doubt to confidence, so kind of 1 would probably mean very poor, high levels of self-doubt, very low levels of confidence, where a 7 would be, complete self-confidence. You see that definition, you think, you know what, that's me, that's spot on. I have full belief in my ability to perform. So it's a case now really of giving yourself an idea of each attribute. Like I said, if you don't feel comfortable sharing, guys, it's absolutely fine. What I'll do, I'll stop sharing the screen for a minute, and if anyone wants to write down some of their attributes in the kind of chat function or give themselves a rating, maybe while Adrian's here in terms of the kind of physical skills and get any feedback, now's an opportunity, but like I say, only if you obviously feel comfortable.
Excuse me. If you had something like using both feet, okay, would you, and you were doing your self-analysis, are you rating that off your good leg or your bad leg, if that makes sense?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So this is where it kind of comes to a bit of personal preference, right? It sounds like a bit of an on-the-fence answer, really, but it's a case of how you're defining that. So using both feet. So is it the ability to say, use my left foot as well as my right foot, or is it just be able to use it efficiently? So really, that would all relate to your definition. Like I said, that's in a way some people would perceive that as a negative of a process. That's the beauty of a process as well. It's all about really the only person who should really be referring to this is the athlete themselves as their kind of process. So it's thinking what that means to you. And that's where that self-awareness comes in as well, where you're actually going, what am I meaning by using both feet? Do I mean it is a case of using both equally, or kind of maybe the ability to, for certain movements, maybe kind of go off one foot or the other? You might even want to break it down. Some people actually break down individual attributes, and you've got time, into their own performance profile for each. So for example, the psychologist who's kind of done an updated version of this, again, sorry about turning this into a cyclist, and an Australian psychologist who's really massive on mental toughness, called Dan Gucciardi. In the paper where he's done this updated process, he talks about, and I think he does, one of the attributes is mental toughness, and then he breaks that attribute into its own performance profile in itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's a nice way of doing it. If you've got the time or effort or kind of inclination to do that, then by all means, kind of break it down even further.
Perfect.
Specificity is a good way to go with this process, because the more specific it is, the more we're able to kind of notice the changes or the developments in that as well.
Yep.
So that's our self-now score. Now, so then we've got a score for where we are now. So then we want a score of ideally where we want to be. And like I say, depending on personal preference, I've seen a few sports psychologists go through this process, and each has their own way of doing it. So rather than kind of impose one on you, I thought I'd give you an option. So option one, when we talk about our ideal self, again, using this 1 to 7 scale, that represents our ideal level of where we feel we could realistically attain in, say, a year's time if we fully applied ourselves. I set you a goal, say, Adrian, to improve using your weaker foot for a year. If you fully applied yourself to your training, where do you think you could be in comparison to now? So that's option number 2 is my ideal self represents the best performer I know in my chosen sport. And again, now this is all about levels. So I actually, recently I think I talked about on the podcast, actually, you listened to it. I recently decided to go through this process myself, because I think it's important to do even when you are a psychologist. So like I said, I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so I looked at that, and I kind of chose my ideal self as one of my opponents at a recent competition who completely dominated our category. So I thought, you know what, if I want to get to that level, if I want to start dominating my category at my belt level, he's going to represent my ideal self, where I want to be, or best. But that was the best performer for my certain levels, my belt level. So depending on what level you are, some people want to choose the best athlete they know in general, which can sometimes be a bit demoralizing. If you're just an amateur like me and I chose, say, a multiple world champion in jiu-jitsu such as Roger Gracie, I might get quite demoralized because there's going to be a big disparity. So sometimes we say the best athlete you know, maybe at your club or in the league you play at. So again, there are levels to it. And then finally, a lot of people just go, well, can't I just rate myself, my ideal self, as a 7 for everything? Absolutely you can. That's how you want to do it. Just say a 7 to be the best in that is what I'm aiming for. So I'm going to give myself a 7 for all of those. So again, just take a moment, guys, to have a think about that and think really what your ideal self is. The next bit involves a bit of basic maths as well, so we won't worry too much, but just to give you an idea. So when we're trying to think, so we've got all these attributes, we've got all these numbers we're attaching to them now. So what you could have now is hopefully you can see this, guys, is a kind of little table, if you want to do it this way, which might look something like this. So we've got our attribute, how we're defining confidence, for example, having a strong belief in my ability. We have our contrast attribute, which is self-doubt, lacking my ability. We've rated confidence in our sport, how important this is to our growth and our success in sport. We've given that a 9. On the 1 to 7 scale, I've said my confidence currently is about a 4 out of 7, so about midway. I've said ideally, where do I want to be? Well, ideally, I want to be a 7. So the next thing we do, we try and associate what the difference is in score. Okay, and there's a method behind why we're doing this maths, guys, I promise. So we know that we're a 4 now, want to be a 7, a difference of 3. So then what we're going to do what's called difference times importance. Okay, so we do 9 times 3, our difference times our importance, which gives us a score of 27. So essentially, why am I doing all of this? So why I'm doing all of this, if we do this for every single attribute, we'll notice we start getting scores for each. And then from there, what we do, we determine what our priority areas are. So if you're like, why am I doing this? Because obviously, if we have 12 different attributes we're looking at, it's not really realistic to say, right, in training every single day or every single week, I'm going to focus on these 12 attributes. What we need to do, we need to focus on the areas where there's the largest disparity or the largest need for growth. So by figuring out where the biggest disparities are and what we think is most important, we can come up with our priority areas. So you do that difference times importance score, and then the top 3 or the highest scores you have, that's your priority area. Hopefully that makes sense. Is that kind of making sense, Adrian? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Cool.
It gives a good objective
absolutely, yeah.
to a subjective process, like, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So psychology often kind of it's to an extent regarded as a bit of subjective science, and this is a bit of a subjective process, obviously, because it is personal to you. But to get a bit of objectivity in there, it's a great way to do it, and it actually does get people thinking, oh wow, okay, yeah, so these are my priority areas. Now, again, with this process, you might want to choose, or you might want to focus on subdividing it. So you might have your priority area for physical skills, a priority area for sport-specific skills, and a priority area for psychological skills. That being said, if you're kind of shit hot with all the psychological skills, you might think, okay, that's not really an area of priority for me. That's an area of strength, or maybe likewise for your physical skills. So it gives you a good indication, really, of just some priority areas. And I would personally recommend really kind of having no more than 3 top areas of priority to choose at any one time, really. So you're not overloading yourself or setting yourself too many goals. Again, this is just a matter of personal preference and using this process with athletes in the past. By all means, other people might disagree with me really in regard to that, but I would say this is a good way to choose your top 3 priority areas. What I'm going to do for a second, sorry, if I can just, whilst I'm going to go back to share my screen, sorry guys, and I'll just show you something quickly as well while I remember. Sorry, apologies guys, I can't find the document at the moment. But what essentially it was, which I'll send to you afterwards, Adrian, and you can send to the guys. Some of us might be more what we refer to as kind of visual learners or want a visual representation of things. So another good way to do this is there's a process called a performance profile wheel, which is where essentially it's a wheel broken into segments of 12 for each of our attributes. And then what we do, we colour in our self-now score. So for example, if we had our confidence on there on one of the attributes, we'd colour 4 squares in out of 7 because our confidence is currently a 4 out of 7. Then over time, what we do when we feel we're developing, we colour in those squares. It sounds a bit childish when I mention it like that, but it's a good visual representation. A lot of athletes choose to have something like this process on their wall. They'll go back to this process maybe every couple of months, and then they'll reassess themselves. And if they feel they've developed in a certain area, they colour a square or a circle rather. And then it gets to a point where ideally we want to have a kind of completed circle to do ours. But as I say, I'll send over an example of that later, guys, if that's a way you might want to choose to do this process. So the whole point of this process, really, what it then leads to is the next phase, which is goal setting. So goal setting, a process maybe some of you are familiar with. Adrian, do you tend to do kind of goal setting with athletes, kind of breaking it down into this kind of process maybe?
Yeah, to a point, to a point.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, guys, I consciously didn't go through the thing of kind of referring to the SMART goals, etc. before, which I'm sure we're aware of, the kind of specific, measurable, attainable, etc. But one good thing to think about when we have our goals in terms of the attributes we want to achieve, at the very top we have a specific outcome goal. So this is a goal which isn't necessarily in our control, but it's something we want to achieve long term. It might be win a championship, it might be voted the best player at our club, etc. This all depends. It's something we're striving to at the end of our kind of journey, but something that's not necessarily in our control. The level before that is specific performance related goals. So these are certain things we have to achieve in order to get to our outcome. So for example, if we wanted to be, the strongest player on the team, you might say to be the strongest player on the team, I need to achieve, 130 kilos in my bench press, say. I'm not sure, depending on the sport, whether that's particularly strong or not. For me, that's certainly beyond my capabilities. But then we've got the underlying process. And this is really where it stands. So all the research suggests that the kind of long-term goal attainment, we really want to focus on the process element. Now, the beauty of process goals, there are things within our control which we can do every day to achieve our goals. So when you're looking at your attributes now, I want you to think of things you can be doing every day to improve on those attributes, if that makes sense. So these are the underlying processes. And the beauty of process goals, as I said, they're completely within our control, okay? It's up to us to do these processes. By doing the processes, so if I wanted to, let's use my terrible example of bench press performance. If I wanted to improve my bench press, I'd think, right, to improve my strength, or maybe just overall strength, I need to go to the gym and do 3 strength-specific sessions a week. I need to make sure my diet and nutrition is good in terms of the amount of protein I get in, etc. I need to avoid injury. So those are the process. By then, by proxy, your performance will improve. When your performance improves, we get to the outcome. So I think we've got an example here. Again, I'm going to use my example of confidence, seeing as I'm taking it from a psychology angle. So I said some goals you might want to do. You might go, right, I want to improve confidence. So how am I going to improve my confidence as an athlete? So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to research what confidence kind of means in sport and how it does. Next, I'm going to kind of say I'm going to practice regularly. So the more competent I feel, the more confident I feel. Competence equals confidence. Then what I'm going to do to give me a sense of confidence, well, I know reflecting on performance accomplishments has been shown in sport to be a great way to enhance my confidence. So I'm going to take time to reflect on positive things I've achieved every day in training and competition. It's just what I did. Sorry, guys, ignore the combat sport there. That's obviously not relevant here. So I'm just going to stop. Before I go into this, guys, I'm just going to stop. And now we've kind of chatted a bit about it before I go into this last bit and maybe give you some ideas of how you might want to go about kind of developing some skills. Has anyone got any questions, or has anyone from maybe a psychological or psychology point of view got any specific skills or attributes they feel, yeah, I'd want to learn or I want to know more about?
Yeah, just one quick question myself then. Would there be like an interference effect by maybe choosing too many things to focus on?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, Adrian. Like I said, I mean, it's a matter of personal preference to an extent, but you don't want to kind of overload yourself with too many goals. And that's when kind of like you have periodization for S&C or what you do on certain days, etc. So, I mean, you can do the same for psychological programming really as well. So have certain times with certain days at certain times. This is dedicated to my psychological development, or I've got certain goals. But like I said, the issue is you don't want to overwhelm yourself too much. I'd say again, there's theory and research which probably kind of not contradicts as such, but have different views to what I'm saying. But I've kind of said I go for a rule of 3 things. I say kind of 3 things, and maybe 3 developmental goals to go about. Because like I say, if you're overloading yourself too much, then yeah, you do get that interference effect where it's difficult to kind of keep track of what you're doing. Yeah. Which can then again as well have a negative impact on your kind of motivation to do it. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to do different things and focus on things, you're less likely to reap the benefits or see where you're growing and developing.
Cool.
So like I said, personal for work for athletes, I say kind of rule of 3 is good. People might suggest a few less or more, but
yep. And just in terms of including people in the process, like would it be say that in a team sport environment you could include the S&C coach and the physical skills?
Absolutely.
Include the skills coach with the technical skills, and so it doesn't have to necessarily be the one person. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great idea, Adrian. So what some people do, if you're comfortable, when I've done it in a team environment, they do their profile. So they get up to that self now bit, they give themselves a rating. You'll then go around the room and you're assigned, you say, right, if you've got enough time, you have to go to someone else's and say, right, you're going to swap over their profile. They're going to do it for you. You're going to give it to each other coach is going to do it for you. And then, like I say, you start on that side, which can be really good for kind of confidence in a way as well. Because like I say, 90% of the time, the athlete will rate themselves lower than others perceive them. And whilst it's ultimately up to them where they want to rate themselves, it's a good way of going, oh, okay, so maybe people see me like this, which again kind of influences your personal construct a bit, where you go, well, actually, I'm being a bit harsh on myself here. Yeah. Maybe I'll give myself there as well. And same with the kind of ideal self. If you're saying, well, I want to be in a year, you might have a lot more belief in the athlete than they do. You think, well, if you apply yourself, now I know you can, say, increase your speed quite dramatically, or power and stuff like that. Yep. So based on some of the things, guys, what I thought, I'm just going to kind of briefly, like I said, I'm conscious of talking at you too much. So at the end, I'll give you a bit of a chance as well. But I just thought I'd briefly share just a few brief ideas on some of the key kind of psychological skills that come up. Like I say, bear in mind that, I mean, really, people do, from my experience, people do full lectures, full in-depth books on each of these subjects alone. So kind of putting it into a bit of a slide is doing a bit of a disservice to it. But just giving you some initial springboard to go off of in terms of if you want to do this area. So first psychological attribute, which comes up a lot, which I've kind of done to death, apologies, in this presentation, is this idea of confidence.
So confidence defined as your kind of belief or ability to perform successfully in a given context. So this is based on a psychologist called Veely and a sources of sports confidence. So first one is mastery of a skill. So as I said, this idea between confidence connection. If you want to get more confident, work towards mastering that skill. Think of a skill you need to work on and develop it. That leads to the next point as well, the ability to perform this skill in front of others, which is that styling element. So if you want to kind of practice the strength of that particular skill, there's nothing like, I think Adrian, you mentioned pressure earlier. So there's nothing like testing the skill in a pressure situation. If we're in a pressurized situation, it gives us an opportunity to see how well we're able to perform that skill. We've got physical and mental preparation. So that's just making sure, as the name suggests, you're optimally prepared. So doing your physical prep, and you're feeling fit at the same time, maybe taking time, that kind of term I used earlier, that mental strength and conditioning, maybe taking some time to periodize that in as well. Social reinforcement is huge as well. A great process about this performance profile is this idea of getting other people's input, especially if they write you as better as you can. So, when we think about it, regardless of what age or what level we are, nothing feels better sometimes when a teammate or a coach really kind of reinforces something we've done really well or praises us for performing a particular skill. An activity actually which is really popular when we do sports psych workshops on this, I mentioned the kind of pieces of paper around the room. It's going around the room and getting your other teammates and coaches to write one thing on this piece of paper which they think about you positively. I've known actually professional sports clubs where they do this process, where they write the skills or attributes they feel this particular person has, and they get them to put it literally in front of their place in the locker rooms and to remind themselves. It sounds like a really simple idea, but a really powerful one as well. Demonstrating effective leadership. If you feel you've got an absence of kind of natural talent, which I've certainly had in sport, it's that ability to demonstrate positive leadership behaviours in terms of your body language, your effort, your communication as well. And also just feeling comfortable in your environment really goes back to that idea of just working in the environment so you feel comfortable, then slowly introducing this idea of pressure. So that's your confidence. Next up, focus. This is another big one. So it's all about knowing as well your kind of where to focus at the right time. Really, that's what it should really be. When we hear about focus, we're all technically focusing on something at any given time in our sports, whether we're focusing on the right thing. So are we focusing internally on what we need to be doing? Or are we focusing on the external environment? In terms of kind of some of the things you want to look at, so psychological interventions or psychological techniques, if there's someone who wants to do a bit of extra reading afterwards, I'll look at techniques such as self-talk. So self-talk is basically a technique which is used to change that voice in your head. So we've all got a constant dialogue running in our head, and sometimes that can be quite nervous or nerve-wracking. So when I used to play football, I used to take penalties, and I used to have a kind of very strong negative self-talk, which is all based around this idea of missing, rather than a kind of positive self-talk or an instructional self-talk, telling me where to put the ball, where to place it, or how to get the best outcomes. So it's about changing that self-talk, and there's a focus-based self-talk, almost giving your mind mental instructions. And the more we practice self-talk, the more it becomes embedded. It's like a computer program. So the more I practice saying these sayings or these statements, the more natural or intrinsic it's going to be. Next, we have mindfulness, a really big and popular now, guys. You might have heard this kind of meditative exercise, kind of gets a bit of maybe a kind of Eastern philosophy, kind of hippie reputation to it, but actually there's a lot of hard science behind it, showing it kind of strengthens the areas of our brain which we need for focus, attention, and also kind of helps us get in the zone as well. And cognitive conditioning. A lot of good resources on this. I won't go into too much depth again. Again, I can explain it afterwards, but all kind of things involving doing certain tasks while occupying your mind with things like having to press certain colours, etc. There's a lot of good people on social media who do this, so I can send you some things. Mental toughness, all about the 4 C's. So a lot of athletes talk about mental toughness. So just remember the 4 C's. So if you want to set some goals, if you want to become a more mentally tough athlete, and mental toughness, the definitions vary, but I like to say mental toughness is the ability to persevere and continue to try your hardest regardless of the situation. Mixed with this kind of idea of grit, you could call it as well. So a kind of long-term perseverance regardless of the situation you're in. So it's control, having a good control of kind of your life events, what's going on in your events, and also the ability to control your emotions. Confidence, we've already discussed that a bit, so it's looking at some of those areas. Commitment, you could say this idea of performance profile, really in itself is helping your mental toughness because it's getting you to commit to certain goals you want to achieve. And then finally, challenge. It's about challenging yourself to continue to learn new skills and take risks as well. So there's an interesting theory in psychology which relates to this actually. And they say there's a real big dichotomy kind of thing. What I mean, there's two different approaches to mindset which an athlete will have to competition to varying extents. Athletes will either see an opportunity as a challenge or a threat. You might have heard of this before. So, complete same situation, maybe both experience a degree of anxiety, but one might experience those feelings as feel, okay, I'm ready, I'm challenging myself, I can overcome this, where the other might see it as a situation they want to avoid and be past. Unsurprisingly, the athletes who are able to see big sporting competitions as a challenge as opposed to a threat, they're the ones who are going to be more successful. So just an idea to keep in mind if you want to be more mentally tough. Motivation. Hopefully you're all motivated to participate in your sport. That's why you're doing it in the first place. Again, motivation's on a continuum. So you've got athletes who are motivated by money, pride, what we call external factors. And you've got athletes who are motivated as well by internal factors, what we call intrinsic motivation. So you might know about this already, guys, but just know that if you want to continue motivation, the strongest form of motivation comes from within, your intrinsic motivation. And that's fueled really by a desire to know. So to get more experience, to learn new knowledge, to master, to learn new skills we talked about, and experience some form of stimulation. In other words, have fun, get involved in the sport, and immerse yourself in it as well. And then the final one people tend to talk about is this idea of resilience, which once again, you'll notice it kind of links to those three attributes we talked already. And what you'll notice as well, with a lot of these psychological attributes, by working to enhance one, we're naturally going to enhance another, if that makes sense. So if we're more confident, we're more resilient. If we're more motivated, we're more resilient. If we're more resilient, we're likely to be more motivated, vice versa as well. So confidence, motivation, focus, which we've already discussed. Having a good support system as well in place. So resilience, by definition, is the ability to kind of bounce back or return from adversity. So that's where people kind of use resilience and mental toughness as one and the same, where resilience is all about really more kind of associated with adversity, overcoming adversity. So a lot of research recently, for example, talks about this idea of kind of post-adversity growth. So when you have an injury, when something bad happens, let's use COVID as an example, going through a tough time with that. They say that resilience is all about coming back from an experience like that as a better athlete as well. So something to bear in mind, these are some of the attributes. And having a positive personality. So positive personality attributes, things like having an optimistic mindset, being open to new experiences. So that, in a nutshell, guys, is it. I apologise. Like I said, I've flown through that and I apologise I've gone through it quickly. But I just wanted to get the information out there. Like I said, literally books have been written on each of these slides alone. So by all means, if you want more information, please do get in touch. There's my email there, info@fightsite.com. Also, please give us a follow on Instagram. I've been a bit lax at the moment, apologies. But every day I do try and kind of come up with more information, which is hopefully helpful. So I'll stop sharing now and just really open the board to any questions you might have, guys, if any. No worries if not.
Excellent, Dan. That was all right. I have about 4 pages of notes taken down there.
No worries, man. Please, no, go for anything you want to ask.
So I suppose question one: at what point do you retest?
Retest, yeah. So again, it's a matter of personal preference. Adrian, sometimes I tell people as kind of little as 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Really, you might want to do it. It kind of depends on. In a similar way, I guess you kind of periodise your kind of S&C training. You might want to do it at increments. I guess times when you feel you've got a chance. Some people like to do it even more regularly. You know, you kind of want to. If for example you're working one-on-one with a sports psychologist, you might do it every month even. I personally think that's a bit short, because what you need to remember, especially with psychological attributes, and something to remember, guys, they can fluctuate. One bad loss, one bad performance, and your confidence can go from here to here. Do you see what I say? You've got to account for kind of long-term fluctuation. But so, I mean, some people might want to do it on a short-term basis, but maybe on a monthly, for example, but have a more kind of separate or more accurate one, which they do every 3 months or so on a quarterly basis.
Okay, perfect. Just that thing you spoke about, just the task of having one good attribute and getting your peers to rate you, essentially. Could you just talk through that process again?
Yeah, in terms of when I said kind of getting other people's ideas. Yeah, so for the performance profile, for example, like I said, even though it's personal to you, it is great to get other people's input. So it's just some people as well. I mean, you can kind of go the triangulation approach. There might be one coach, or for example, you're going like an S&C coach, a main sporting coach, a trusted teammate, and it could even be as well a family member who regularly watches you, as long as you trust their opinion. You've got someone like my mum, for example. If you give me a 10 on everything, she's delusional and thinks I'm better than I am. So obviously there's an element of objectivity, but that's what it's all about. Like you said, it's a subjective process. So it's about getting a bit of triangulation. So it might be one teammate, it might be a handful of teammates. Sometimes we put athletes into small groups of 3 and 4, as long as they know each other well. Maybe, for example, players who play in the same positions. Apologies, like I say, I won't go into too many specifics because my understanding of kind of a specific sport you guys do isn't as good as my other knowledge, so I'm not going to go down the wrong road. But for example, players in a defensive position might work together, a defensive team or a more attacking team.
Yeah, perfect. I just have one more question, and I'll have the mic then. And this is kind of gone off topic slightly. I guess just from my point of view, right? Just my observations. Obviously, my time spent with players is split between the field and the gym, right? And what I often notice is, right, that the gym can become a safe place for players, okay? In the sense that a player can have a really bad game on a Sunday, right? Go to the gym, have a really good lifting session, okay? And now all of a sudden feel really good about themselves leaving the gym. Now, at the outset, I thought, okay, that's a positive thing. But if I'm to flip that around, the sport is Gaelic football or hurling, okay? And there's no measurable consequence to having a bad day at the gym. But there is a measurable consequence to having a bad day on the field, i.e. the scoreboard, okay? So then what I find myself grappling with being this safe place for players in the gym scenario, but it's highly decontextualized because it's only a part of the process to improving the scoreboard, okay?
Yeah.
And obviously the psychology that's involved in that, right? Is that something that you've ever encountered, or what would your opinion or your thought process be on something like that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Adrian. Like you said, I think as I mentioned, hence why with this process for kind of fluctuation in attributes is so interesting and something to take in mind. So I think, like I said, I think it's really important for athletes to have a safe space. I also think it's important that as coaches, we kind of create an environment where they feel they can talk about and address these issues. And I really believe in the importance of what I call kind of a multidisciplinary approach. I don't just mean or an interconnected approach is probably a better term, where we are aware of different things going on as well. And I think from the athlete perspective, I think if you are having something where you start well or go badly or vice versa, I always say it's important to be reflective and not reflexive. By that, I mean, for example, if you have a bad game or a bad event, something happens, we have a tendency to act with emotion before logic. So we get quite frustrated and we don't actually see the situation objectively. So I'd see as a coach, we've kind of got a duty to make sure that athletes have a time to kind of experience the emotion of something if it's bad, but then have time to address it objectively. I never think we should, whilst it's important to kind of tell athletes to get over a negative performance, I don't necessarily agree with telling them to forget it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I feel that it's such a good opportunity for reflection, but I think we have to kind of create an environment. It's up to the athletes as well to create an environment where they feel able to be reflective and not reflexive, if you see what I mean. And in that context, when I use the term reflexive, I mean, again, acting with emotion. I've been fortunate enough to work with some high-level athletes, and I spent kind of 3 years working at a Premier League football academy, so some really high-level guys, and, the amount of them, they'd get substituted and kind of speak to me and go, oh shit, I'm not playing again, I hate this sport. So even the next day, you give them a chance to kind of reflect on the thing, and the mindset's completely changed. So I think in that, I would say athletes and both coaches have to make sure they're kind of creating an environment or aware that they need to create a condition where they can get athletes to think with logic and not emotion, and always see it as an opportunity for growth. I'm not going to go through stuff on growth mindset. I'm sure we've heard that to death, but there's a reason why it is to death, because it's that opportunity. So I think just making sure, like I say, we're not hiding behind or telling athletes to forget a bad performance, but we are seeing it as a positive and getting them to see it as an opportunity to grow and develop. So that's what it all is, really. So I'm not sure if that's a bit of a roundabout house's way of kind of what you're talking about.
That's cool. Just if any of you lads have a question, lads, feel free to jump in there.
Actually, I found the idea that you spoke about the threat versus a challenge of a big event as something interesting and something I'd relate to myself. So you kind of mentioned that, let's say, just when you were taking penalties, you might use self-talk as a method of dealing with that pressure. So how did you arrive at that, and how did you prepare before the game, and then let's say in the moment?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question, Killian. So this kind of challenge and threat stuff. So kind of there's a load of research. Actually, one of my friends did a whole PhD on how to get a challenge state. So the biggest predictor of it is what we call self-efficacy. So that's basically a situation-specific form of confidence. So that confidence I spoke about. So it's getting yourself in an idea where you've got a strong belief in your ability. So the next idea is this idea of control as well. So we've got what we call kind of attribution. So those who have a challenge state, the thing we as psychologists, our favourite expression is control the controllables. I'm not sure if you heard that before, but what they talk about, it's an easy thing to say, but we so often forget it. So that's another key element which people talk about. So this ability to control the controllable. So you focus on the controllable elements of your performance. So by doing that, for example, let's use the penalty example, it was what I control. So rather than focusing on, obviously to an extent you have to, where the keeper's going to go, I'd focus more what's in my control. It's my run up, being composed, picking my spot and agreeing with that as well. So it can be situation specific, but it can also be more more broad on the game plan level, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it's that, and then there's that mindfulness element as well, that ability to kind of focus on the present moment, because there's actually a physiological element to it. So when you're in a threat state, some research suggests that your physiology is different. I won't go into all the chemicals because, to be honest, I can't remember them. But a really good intervention for that is actually mindfulness, where it's actually been shown to, I think cortisol is actually related to actually. So for example, using something like an exercise like mindfulness, it reduces the cortisol levels, which makes us less stressed, which makes us more able to get into this challenge state as well. But by all means, Killian, what I'll do, because there's some good stuff on that, I'll send Adrian some information on it afterwards to send over to you. And you can read up a bit more about it, because it's really, really interesting. It's only really a recent area of psychology they started talking more about this kind of challenge versus threat. But I think so many athletes can relate to it. Like I say, a majority of athletes I speak to, it is this idea they tend to, even ones who operate at a high level, they tend to perceive kind of competitions or certain situations as a challenge or a threat. So I think getting over it's really important. Hopefully, sorry, that kind of helped answer your question. So.
No, definitely. Thanks very much for that, Dan.
No worries. Cool.
Have you seen, just as a matter of interest, have you seen any, well, I have kind of seen that athletes who are generally more anxious tend to have a higher injury rate, right? And I don't think there's anything in the research in that, because I do actually remember, I didn't do like an exhaustive search, but I remember one time definitely popping it in around a couple of search engines, and I couldn't find anything. But like what I notice is, right, okay, you're anxious and you go into this anxious state, then it's going to affect your breathing, okay? So then you're going to chest breathe, rib cage lifts, pelvis anteriorly tilts, length-tension relationship of hamstrings start to get altered, and the knock-on effect of that through performance and injury rates. Have you ever actually seen something like that?
Not personally, Adrian, but you're absolutely right. There's a physiological element to it. Hence why you probably know it yourself. Hence why there can be a lot of post-injury or reoccurrence of an injury, particularly individuals who are high in anxiety about returning. Because what happens, even though physiologically they're cleared to play and they're actually technically now as fit as anyone else, they have a high degree of anxiety. What happens when we have a high degree of anxiety? It tends to restrict the fluidity of certain movements. So there's this idea called kind of conscious reinvestment. When we're nervous or anxious, we start to re-engage the part of our brain. It's quite interesting that we do when we're first learning a skill or performing. So for example, something you do in hurling or Gaelic football, where you actually kick a ball with a strong fluid motion, you kind of access the part of the brain where the first learning skills, so it becomes more rigid, more. And obviously, if we're performing skills rigidly or not fluidly, we're more likely or increase the risk of injury because we're being rigid in our movements, for example. So whilst there's not a strong degree or I say there's not, I to be honest, that's not an area I've looked in as much, if I'm being honest, with the injury literature, but there certainly is a psychological link. Like you say, kind of, yeah, I mean, the physiological effect that anxiety has, kind of increased heart rate, obviously increased perceptions of kind of fatigue and stuff. If we're feeling more fatigued, if we're getting more physiologically fatigued as well as psychologically, it's going to have a negative impact as well. So there's definitely a link there, I think. So yeah, anxiety management is huge for injury prevention and really importantly, return to sport as well.
Yeah, and just in terms of like, in my experience, the toughest time with players is when they are injured. So that period of being injured, and like a simple strategy I always would have had would be to try to get the athlete to be in a state where they're still learning and they're still developing, right?
Absolutely.
So if they have a lower limb injury, I might get them juggling, right? So at least they feel like I'm growing, I'm learning, I'm not stagnating, even though all the other 26 players in the panel are playing and competing. At least I have some kind of an objective skill set. And if I can sell it with a trigger, i.e., right, it's going to improve your eye-hand coordination, your spatial awareness, then it just gives them something mentally to invest in, right? Would you have any other strategies around dealing with injuries, the time of injury and injury as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on, Adrian. I think a term you used right at the beginning when you were talking about philosophy was this idea of autonomy, relatedness, and mastery or competence, which is this self-determination theory. So a term I quickly used in the presentation, I talked about this idea of post-adversarial kind of post-traumatic growth, they call it, which is kind of coming back from injuries stronger before and stuff. And what the key indicator of that is that self-determination theory. And that goes for during the injury as well. So giving athletes a clear focus, so they still feel a sense of autonomy or independence what they do. They're still given opportunities to experience competence and master new skills. And hugely important, just by being there, that kind of feeling of relatedness, feeling like part of the team, getting them involved, getting them active, having social support as well. And also there is the kind of classic psychological techniques, which again have been shown to varying degrees to be useful. So you have specific forms of imagery, like injury rehabilitation imagery, where we imagine, this is going to sound really floaty, but kind of warm, fuzzy feelings, for want of a much better term in that particular area. Imagine the actual bone or the actual muscle healing. Actually, some research would suggest that actually has an impact on speeding up injury recovery. Same thing with exercises like a PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, teaches us to release tension in certain areas. So it's a mixture of psychological skills, particularly kind of imagery-based skills and relaxation-based skills, but also ensuring the athlete has a continual sense of autonomy, competence, and that kind of social support and relatedness. That's creating the best environment. And if you do that, it is actually getting the athlete, like I say, it does show, the research shows they will come back from the injury not only quicker, but hopefully kind of stronger psychologically as well, mentally. Like I say, if you're really able to sell it, that actually injury isn't necessarily a bad, it's very difficult at first, but injury is actually a bad thing. You can come back from an injury and be a better athlete than you were before, and that's a really good way to frame it. And if people buy into that, then they're more likely to be motivated and stick to the path of the course as well. Yeah,
and I think the thing I struggled with in the past would have been, like, when you think of it, like we look at the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza with, like, you are the placebo with his work through the placebo effect, and the work through breath work. Possibly what I would have struggled with in the past is maybe introducing too much too soon, in the sense that, you know, some people are very more open to it, some people are very close to it, and it's just about finding you know, if you introduce too much too soon, you're going to push someone into a state of anxiety.
Definitely.
If you introduce too little, they're going to be in a boredom state. So it's trying to find this state of flow somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and I think, you need to remember as well, like I said, that's a really good point, Adrian. I think it's as dramatic as it sounds, like injury, it's been shown you kind of almost, especially if it's quite serious, when you go through the 5 stages of grief, like you do experience it in a loss or death. And so, like I say, the biggest work from a psychological, but when I say this is work of psychologists, it's work of coaches and teammates as well. It's getting them to adapt to the injury, you know, because at first there are those worries and concerns. So your main role at first is making sure that they're psychologically well adjusted to the injury. They have all the facts, they know how long they're going to be out for, they understand the emotional implications, they understand they're going to get frustrated. And like you say, that's what you need to do first before you can move on, really. Then once they accept the injury, then move on to working with them to overcome it.
Yeah, 100%. Then I have asked loads, and I know
I appreciate it. Keeps the cobwebs away, man. Helps me remember some things on the discussion. So I'm always appreciative to have these chats. No, and as I said, guys, I'll send all my details to Adrian, and if any of it's been of interest, Gillian, for example, challenge threat stuff, I'll send some information over in that as well. And just always, I always say, like, emails are always open, so I'm always willing to have a chat. Like I say, it helps keep my brain sharp as well, talking about this stuff. So
yeah, 100%. Dan, thank you very much, my man.
No worries. Pleasure, guys. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Dan.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot. All the best. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, lads.